is indeed story time, and I'm actually running late. I just glanced at the clock and was going, oh crap, it's already after 9. But I am here. Again, I completely lost track of time. So how you doing, Cold Skeleton? If you can hear me and you're not behind the ads. I didn't advertise I was streaming tonight. I actually got caught up watching lore videos, oddly enough. Okay, there's my camera. Okay. You don't really have to worry about the fairy tales because that's the individual stories. I was watching someone else's lore video, so. Let's see. How many stories are we in? Now, since all my stories are on my YouTube channel anyway, it's not that hard to catch up. And it looks like I am 5 stories into this book already. So I'm starting tonight with story 6. But not too bad. And congrats on getting first. Doesn't happen often. Which is always strange because a lot of my friends that normally would be streaming right now aren't streaming. And I only really noticed because one of my other friends started streaming and I saw what time it was. Like, oh no, it's after 9. So I should probably go ahead and get over to the library. And now my fan isn't too loud. And I'm hearing it, but that's just hearing it through my own headsets. Doesn't look like it's registering on my microphone too badly though. So I also don't know if any of my sound alerts are working. Well, it shows it's working. Yeah, because it popped up on my desktop audio, so it must have played. Yeah, this is, what, the second week of this book? I'm gonna mark it as, yeah, book part 2, okay. Yeah, I try to get the 3-minute run of ads just so it doesn't have the pre-roll while I'm trying to do stories. Helps to get it out of the way first. That's why I usually start early so I can get the ads out of the way before I really even get to my main screen. Okay, why am I not hearing the sound alert? It also says we're still behind ads. Hello? Oh. Turned off. No wonder I wasn't hearing it. I wonder why I didn't have blurb turned on. That's weird. Okay, heard it that time. Let's see which one it was. Legit. Turn off that one. Let's find out. But anyway, this is the second week of the Yellow Fairy book. So, if we are all ready, we'll go ahead and get into it. And again, I'm starting a little late, so. Make some tech stuff and part of the recording software. Cool. Congrats on catching the Lord again. I will eventually try to get more tech stuff done, but as it is, I'm still working from my laptop, so. Anyway, yeah. Laptops aren't too bad, but I can't game on this one, so I'm really limited to what I can stream. Anytime I do any game streaming, I end up streaming remote play, and yeah. Anyway, this one just doesn't have a whole lot of video processing capabilities. But as it is, our first story for this wonderful Friday night of fairy tales. The Iron Stove. Once upon a time, when wishes came true, there was a king's son who was enchanted by an old witch, so that he was obliged to sit in a large iron stove in the woods. There he lived for many years, and no one could free him. At last the king's daughter came into the wood. She had lost her way and could not find her father's kingdom again. She had been wandering around and round for 9 days, until at last she came upon an iron stove. A voice came within and asked her, "Where do you come from, and where do you want to go?" She answered, "I have lost my way to my father's kingdom, and I shall never get home again." Then the voice from the stove said, "I will help you to find your home again, and that in a very short time, if you promise you will do what I ask you. I am a greater prince than you are a princess, and I will marry you." Then she grew frightened and thought, "What can a young lassie do to an iron stove?" But she wanted very much to go home to her father, so she promised to do what he had wished. He said, "You must come home and bring a knife with you to scrape a hole in the iron." Then he gave her someone for a guide, who walked near her and said nothing, but he brought her in 2 hours to her house. There was a great joy in the castle when the princess came back, and the old king fell on her neck and kissed her. But she was very troubled, and said, "Dear father, listen to what has befallen me. I should never have come home again out of the great wild wood if it had not been for an iron stove, to whom I had to promise that I will go back to free him and marry him." The old king was so frightened that he nearly fainted, for she was his only daughter. So they consulted together and determined that the miller's daughter, who was very beautiful, should take her place. They took her there and gave her a knife and said she must scrape at the iron stove. She scraped for 24 hours and did not make the least impression. When the day broke, a voice called from the iron stove, "It seems to me that it is day outside." Then she answered, "It seems to me I think I hear my father's mill rattling." "So you are a miller's daughter? Then go away at once and tell the king's daughter to come." So she went away and told the old king that the thing inside the iron stove would not have her, but wanted the princess. The old king was frightened, and his daughter wept. But they had a swineherd's daughter who was even more beautiful than the miller's daughter, and they gave her a piece of gold to go to the iron stove instead of the princess. Then she was taken out and had to scrape for 24 hours, but she could make no impression. As soon as the day broke, the voice from the stove called out, "It seems to be daylight outside." Then she answered, "It seems to me too. I think you hear father blowing his horn." "You're a swineherd's daughter. Go away at once and let the king's daughter come, and say to her that I will foretell shall come to pass, and if she does not come, everything in the kingdom shall fall into ruin, and not one stone shall be left upon another." When the princess heard this, she began to cry, but it was no good. She had to keep her word. She took leave of her father, put a knife in her belt, and went to the iron stove in the wood. As soon as she reached it, she began to scrape, and the iron gave way, and before 2 hours had passed, she had made a little hole. Then she peeped in and saw such a beautiful youth, all shining with gold and precious stones, that she fell in love with him on the spot. Princesses. So she scraped away harder than ever and made the hole so large that he could get out. Then he said, "You are mine, and I am thine. You are my bride, and have set me free." He wanted to take her with him to his kingdom, but she begged him to let her go just once more to her father. And the prince let her go, but told her not to say more than 3 words to her father, then to come back. So she went home, but alas, she said more than 3 words, and immediately the iron stove vanished and went away over a mountain of glass and sharp swords. But the prince was free and was no longer shut up in it. Then she said goodbye to her father and took a little money with her and went again to the great woods to look for the iron stove. But she could not find it. Then she's... There you go. She sought it for 9 days, and then her hunger became so great that she did not know how she could live any longer. And when it was evening, she climbed a little tree and wished that the night would not come, because she was afraid of wild beasts. When midnight came, she saw far off a little light and thought, if only I could reach that. Then she got down from the tree and went towards the light. She came to a little old house with a great deal of grass growing around it, and stood in front of a little heap of wood. She thought, "Alas, what am I coming to?" and peeped through the window, but she saw nothing inside except big and little toads, and a table beautifully spread with roast meats and wine, and all the dishes and drinking cups were of silver. Then she took heart and knocked. Then a fat toad called out to her. "Little toad with leg like crook, open wide that door and look. Who is it that so shook?" And a little toad came forward and let her in. When she entered, they all bid her welcome and made her sit down. They asked her how she came there and what she wanted. Then she told everything that had happened to her, and how, because she had exceeded her permission only to speak 3 words, the stove had disappeared with the prince, and how she had searched very long and hard for him, must wander over mountain and valley till she found him. Then the toad said, "Little green toad, whose leg doth twist, go to the corner of which thee wist, and bring me the large gold kist." And the little toad went and brought out a great chest, and they gave her food and drink, and led her to a beautifully made bed of silk and samite, on which she lay down and slept soundly. When the day dawned, she arose, and the old toad gave her 3 things out of the huge chest to take with her. She would need them, for she had to cross a high glass mountain, 3 cutting swords, and a great lake. When she had passed these, she would find her lover again. She was given 3 large needles, a plow wheel, and 3 nuts, which she had to take great care of. She set out with these things, and when she came to the glass mountain, which was so slippery, she stuck the 3 needles behind her feet and then in front, and so she got over it. When she was on the other side, she put them carefully away. Then she reached the 3 cutting swords and got on her plow wheel and rolled over them. At last she came to a great lake, at which, when she had crossed that, arrived at a beautiful castle. And say how she crossed the lake. She went in and gave herself out as a servant, a poor maid who would gladly be engaged. But she knew that the prince whom she had freed from the iron stove in a great wood was in the castle, so she was taken on as a kitchen maid for very small wages. Now the prince was about to marry another princess, for he thought that she was long dead. In the evening, when she washed up and was ready, she felt in her pocket and found the 3 nuts which the old toad had given her. She cracked one, and was going to eat the kernel, when behold, there was a beautiful royal dress inside it. When the bride heard of this, she came and begged for the dress and wanted to buy it, saying that it was not a dress for a serving maid. Then she said she would not sell it unless she was granted one favor, namely, to sleep by the prince's door. The bride granted this because the dress was so beautiful and she had so few like it. When it was evening, she said to her bridegroom, "That stupid maid wants to sleep by your door." "If you are contented, I am," he said, but she gave him a glass of wine, in which he poured a sleeping draught. They both went to his room, but he slept so soundly that she could not wake him. The maid wept all night long and said, "I have freed you from the wild wood out of the iron stove. I have sought you and crossed the glassy mountain, 3 sharp swords, and a great lake before I found you. And will you not hear me now?" The servants outside heard how she cried the whole night, and they told their master about it in the morning. Fairy tales. When she had washed up the next morning, in the evening, she bit the 2nd nut, and there was a still more beautiful dress inside. When the bride saw it, she wanted to buy it also, but the maid did not want money, and asked that she should sleep again by the prince's door. The bride, however, gave him another sleeping draught. He slept so soundly that he heard nothing. But the kitchen maid wept all night long and said, "I have freed you in a wood and from an iron stove. I sought you and have crossed the glassy mountain, 3 sharp swords, and a great lake to find you, and now you will not hear me." The servants outside heard how she cried the whole night, and in the morning they told their master again. And when she had washed up on a 3rd night, she bit the 3rd nut, and there was still a more beautiful dress that was made of pure gold. When the bride saw it, she wanted to have it, but the maid would only give it to her on the condition that she should sleep outside for the 3rd time by the prince's door. But the prince took care not to drink the sleeping draught that night, when she began to weep and to say, "Dear sweetheart, I freed you in the terrible wild wood and from an iron stove." He jumped up and said, "You are right. You are mine, and I'm thine." Though it was still night, he got into a carriage with her, and they took the false bride's clothes away, so that she could not follow them. When they came to the great lake, they rowed across, and when they reached the 3 sharp swords, they sat on the plow wheel, and on the grassy mountain they stuck the needles in. So they arrived at last at the little old house, but when they stepped inside, it turned into a large castle. The toads were all freed, and were beautiful king's children, running about with joy. They were married, and they remained in that castle, which was much larger than the princess's father's. But beside the old man did not like being left alone, so they went and fetched him. So they had 2 kingdoms and lived on in great wealth. The mouse is run. My story's done. Okay. It's nice to know that cursed creatures still get to have capabilities of magic powers, but it does not explain how the frog's curse got broke. Hi, Matsu. Welcome in. Let's see. And Darth Paramuse. Congrats on 2nd. And congrats on catching that Electric. So that was the first story for the night. Interesting one to start with. And I didn't have to sing, I just had frog poetry. I had toad poetry. And I didn't have to say the princess's lines, but no, not bad. Anyway, I hope you're all having a great evening and had a great week. Toad poetry. Little toad with a leg like a crook. Open wide the door and look. Who is it? The latch that shook. Yeah, toad poetry. Let's see. The next one's a dragon and his mother. That's gonna be a fun one. Time in the fairy tales is not run standard. Probably much a lot like it does in the study. It does not follow particular rules. Just like when I was writing Three Feathers I didn't write it all yesterday. When I was doing Three Feathers the other day, I literally made time go by faster in the cave underneath the rock, but yeah, that's where it would, because he was in there, and by the time he came back out, his brothers were already back from their adventures. I mean, he was in a rock outside the castle. But anyway, our second story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales. The Dragon and His Grandmother. There was once a great war, and the king had great many soldiers, but he gave them so little pay that they could not live on it. Things don't change. Then 3 of them took counsel together and determined to desert. One of them said to the others, "If we are caught, we will be hanged by the gallows. How sad are we about this?" The other said, "Do you see that large cornfield over there? If we were to hide ourselves in that, no one could find us. The army cannot come into it, and tomorrow it is to march on." So they crept into the cornfield, but the army did not march on, but remained encamped close around them. They sat for 2 days and 2 nights in the corn, and grew so hungry that they nearly died. But if they went out, it was certain death. They said at last, "What is our use of deserting? We must perish here miserably." Whilst they were speaking, a fiery dragon came through the air and hovered about near them, and asked Why were they hidden there? They answered, We're 3 soldiers and have deserted because our pay was so small. Now, if we remain here, we shall die of hunger, and if we move out, we shall be strung up by the gallows. You're in a cornfield. Oh. If you will serve me for 7 years, said the dragon, I will lead you through the midst of the army, that no one shall catch you. Well, we have no choice. We must take the offer, they said. And then the dragon seized them by his claws and took them through the air over the army and set them down on earth, a long way from it. He gave them a little whip, saying, Whip and slash with this, and as much money as you want will jump up before you. You can then live as great lords, keep horses, and drive about in carriages. But after 7 years, you're mine. Then he put a book before them, which he made all 3 of them sign. I will give you a riddle, he said. If you guess it, you shall be free and out of my power. The dragon then flew away, and they journeyed on with their little whip. They had as much money as they wanted, wore grand clothes, and made their way into the world. Wherever they went, they lived in merrymaking and splendor, drove about with horses and carriages, ate and drank, but otherwise did nothing wrong. The time passed quickly away, and when the 7 years were nearly ending, 2 of them grew terribly anxious and frightened. But the third made light of it, saying, Don't be afraid, brothers, I wasn't born yesterday. I will give the riddle. When they went into a field and sat down, and the 2 pulled long faces, an old woman passed by and asked them, Why are you so sad? Alas, what have you to do with it? You cannot help us. Who knows, she answered. Only confide your trouble in me. And then they told her that they had become the servants of the dragon for 7 long years, and how he had given them money and plentiful as blackberries. But as they had signed their names, they were his, unless when the 7 years had passed, they could guess a riddle. The old woman said, If you would help yourselves, one of you must go into the wood. There he will come upon a tumbled-down building of rocks, which looks like it was a little house. He must go in, and there he will find help. The 2 melancholy ones thought, Well, that won't save us. And they remained where they were. But the 3rd and merry one jumped up and went into the wood until he found the rock hut. In the same hut sat a very old woman, who was the dragon's grandmother. When she asked him how he came, and what was his business there, he told her what had happened. And because she was pleased with him, she took compassion on him, and said that she would help. She lifted up a large stone which lay over the cellar, saying, Hide yourself in there. You can hear all that is spoken in this room. Only sit still and do not stir. When the dragon comes, I will ask him what the riddle is, for he tells me everything. Listen carefully what he answers. At midnight, the dragon flew in and asked for his supper. His grandmother laid the table and brought out food and drink until he was satisfied, and they ate and drank together. Then, in the course of conversation, he asked him what he had done that day and how many souls he had conquered. I haven't done much luck today, he said, but have a tight hold on 3 soldiers. Indeed, 3 soldiers, she said, who cannot escape you. They are mine, answered the dragon scornfully, for I shall only give them 1 riddle which they will never be able to guess.
What sort of riddle is it?
I will tell you this. In the North Sea lies a dead sea cat. That shall be their roast meat. The rib of a whale. That shall be their silver spoon. And the hollow foot of a dead horse. That will be their wine glass. When the dragon had gone to bed, his old grandmother pulled up the stone and let out the soldier.
Did you pay attention to everything?
Yes, he replied. I know enough and can help myself splendidly. Then he went by another way through the window secretly, and in haste back to his comrades. He told them how the dragon had been outwitted by his grandmother, and how he had heard from his own lips the answer to the riddle. When they were delighted and in high spirits, and took out the whip and cracked so much money that it came jumping from the ground. And when the 7 years had quite gone, the dragon came back with his book, and pointing at the signatures, and said, I will take you underground with me. You shall have a meal there. If you can tell me what you will get for your roast meat, you shall be free, and shall also keep the whip. Then the first soldier, in the North Sea lies a dead sea cat. That shall be our meat. The dragon was much annoyed, humming and hawing a good deal, and he asked the second, But what shall be your spoon? The rib of a whale shall be our silver spoon. The dragon made a face and growled again 3 times. Then he said to the third, Do you know what your wine glass shall be? A dead horse's hoof shall be our wine glass. Then the dragon flew away with a loud shriek, and had no more power over them. But the 3 soldiers took the little whip and whipped as much money as they wanted, and lived happily to their lives' ends. Now, riddle me this. How was that actually a riddle? It's like, it gives absolutely no context. What does going underground have to do with the Northern Sea? What is a sea cat? And, like, that is not a riddle at all. I shall take you underground, and you will have to tell me what your roast meat, your spoon, and your goblet will be. That gives absolutely no context to a riddle at all. It's like, first of all, you're underground. How are you going to get access to the North Sea, especially for a dead sea cat? I mean, if he presented the items, maybe, but that's not a riddle. It's like, okay, well, riddles are supposed to make you think. That one's just like, make you openly guess whatever. I'm still trying to figure out what a sea cat is. Oh yeah, but they literally said the North Sea. Is there a North Sea underground? Would the soldiers know about it? I could see a catfish being a sea cat, but I don't know. Oh, excuse me. Again, that's... They use the dragon in this version. In other versions, I've actually seen it being the devil and his grandmother, but still. Dragons are often related to the devil. or at least interchangeable. Okay, the next title is interesting. Donkey Cabbage. Okay, well. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting story. At least my model is responding a lot better tonight. Anyway. So, our third story. Hey, Taka. Blinky Blanky speed. Okay. Try this again. I just had to do that. I think EB came in and played the spooky whispers the other night, and I didn't even hear them. I still like watching it now. Okay, let's see if this works. I'm curious. I'm glad I've got the setup that they don't show up in the VODs, but still, it's hilarious to hear them. When I do game streams, they'll end up in the VODs. When I do reading, not so much. Anyway, our next wonderful story for this Friday night of fairy tales: the Donkey Cabbage. There was once a young hunter who went boldly into the forest. He had a merry and light heart, and as he went whistling, there he came along to an ugly old woman who said to him,
"Good day, hunter. You are very merry and contented, but I suffer hunger and thirst. Give me a trifle."
The hunter was sorry for the poor old woman, and he felt in his pocket and gave her all he could spare. He was going on then, the old woman stopped him and said,
"Listen, dear hunter, to what I say. Because of your kind heart, I will make you a present. Go on your way, but in a short time you will come to a tree on which sits 9 birds who have a cloak in their claws and are quarreling over it. Then take aim with your gun and shoot the middle of them. They will let the cloak fall, but one of the birds will be hit and drop down dead. Take the cloak with you. It is a wishing cloak, and when you throw it on your shoulders, you have only to wish yourself at a certain place, and in the twinkling of an eye, you're there. take the heart out of the dead bird and swallow it whole, and every early morning you will get up and you will find a gold piece under your pillow.
Odd. The hunter thanked the wise woman and thought to himself, "These are splendid things she has promised me, if only they come to pass." So he walked about 100 yards, and then he heard above him in the branches such a screaming and chirping that he looked up. And there he saw a heap of birds tearing at a cloth with their beaks and feet, shrieking and tugging and fighting, and as if they wanted it for himself. Oh. "Well," said the hunter, "this is wonderful. It is just as the old woman said." And he took his gun off of his shoulder and pulled the trigger and shot in the midst of them, so that the feathers flew about. Then the flock took flight with much screaming, but one fell dead and the coat fluttered to the ground. Then the hunter did as the old woman had told him. He cut open the bird and found its heart and swallowed it, and he took the cloak home with him. The next morning when he woke, he remembered the promise and waited to see if it had come true. But when he lifted up his pillow, there sparkled the gold piece. And the next morning he found another, and so on, every time he got up. He collected a heap of gold, and at last he thought to himself, "What good is all my gold to me if I stay at home? I will travel and look a bit about me in the world." So he took leave of his parents, slung his hunting knapsack on and his gun around him, and journeyed into the world. It happened that one day he went through a thick wood, and when he came to the end of it, there lay in the plain before him a large castle. At one of the windows in it stood an old woman with the most beautiful maiden by her side looking out. But the old woman was a witch, and said to the girl,
There comes out of the wood who has a wondrous treasure in his body, which we must manage to possess ourselves of. Darling daughter, we have more rights to it than he. He has a bird's heart in him, and so every morning there lies a piece of gold under his pillow."
She told her how they could get hold of it, and how she was to coax it from him, and at last threatened her angrily,
"And if you do not obey me, you shall repent it."
When the hunter came near, he saw the maiden, and said to himself, "Well, I've traveled so far that I should rest and turn into a beautiful castle. Plenty of money I have in it." But the reason was that he had caught sight of the lovely maiden's face. Thank you. He went into the house, and was kindly received, and hospitality was given, and he was definitely entertained. It was not long before he was so much in love with her that the maiden thought of nothing else, and looked only at her eyes, and whatever she wanted, that he gladly did. Then the old witch said,
"Now we must have the bird heart. He will not feel it when it is gone."
So she prepared him a drink, and when she had poured it into a goblet, gave it to the maiden, who had to hand it to the hunter. "Drink with me now, my dearest," she said. Then he took the goblet, and when he had swallowed the drink, the bird heart came out of his mouth. The maiden had to get hold of it secretly, and then swallow it herself, for the old witch wanted to have it. Thenceforth he found no more gold under his pillow, and it lay under the maiden's. But when he was so much in love and so much bewitched that he thought of nothing else except spending all of his time with the maiden, then the old witch said,
"We have the bird heart. We must also get the wishing cloak from him."
The maid answered,
Will we leave him that? He has already lost his wealth.
The old witch grew angry and said,
Such a cloak is a wonderful thing. It is seldom to be had in this world, and I must have it and will.
So she beat the maiden and said that if she did not obey, it would go ill with her. So she did her mother's bidding, and standing one day in the window, she looked away into the far distance, as if she were very sad. "Why are you standing there looking so sad?" asked the hunter.
Alas, my love, she replied, over there lies a granite mountain where the most costly precious stones grow. I have a great longing to go there, so that when I think of it I am very sad. For who can fetch them? Only the birds who fly. The man, never.
"If you have no other trouble," said the hunter, "that one I can easily remove from your heart." So he wrapped her round in the cloak and wished themselves to the granite mountain. And in an instant they were there, sitting on it. The precious stones sparkled so brightly on all sides that it was a pleasure to see them, and they collected the most beautiful and costly together. But now the old witch had thought her witchcraft caused the hunter's eyes to become heavy. He said to the maiden,
"Won't we sit down here a little while and rest? I'm so tired that I can hardly stand on my feet."
So they sat down, and he laid his head on her lap and fell asleep. As soon as he was sound asleep, she unfastened the cloak from his shoulders and threw it around her own, and left the granite and stones, and wished herself home again. But when the hunter had finished his sleep and awoke, he found that his love had betrayed him and left him alone on the wild mountain. "Oh," he said, "why is faithlessness so great in the world?" I wonder that. And he sat down in sorrow and trouble, not knowing what to do. But the mountain belonged to fierce and huge giants who also lived and traded there, and he had not sat long before he saw 3 of them standing towards him. So he lay down as if he had fallen back into a deep sleep. The giants came up and first pushed him with a foot and said, "Oh, what sort of earthworm is that?" The second said, "Crush him dead." But the third said contemptuously, "It is not worth the trouble. Let him live. He cannot remain here. And if he goes higher up the mountain, the clouds will take him and carry him off." Thus they went away. But the hunter listened to their talk, and as soon as they had gone, he rose and climbed to the summit. When he had sat there a little while, a cloud swept by, and seizing him, carried him away. It traveled for a time in the sky, and then it sank down and hovered over a large vegetable garden surrounded by walls, so that it came safely to the ground amidst cabbages and vegetables. The hunter then looked at him, saying, "If only there was something to eat. I am so hungry, and it will go badly with me in the future, for I see not an apple or pear or fruit of any kind. Nothing but vegetables everywhere." At last he thought, "At a pinch I can eat a salad. It does not taste as well as I'd like, but it will refresh me." So he looked about for a good head of cabbage and ate it. But no sooner had he swallowed a couple of mouthfuls than he felt very strange and found himself wonderfully changed. 4 legs began to grow on him, and a thick head, and 2 long ears, and he saw with horror that he had changed into a donkey. But as he was still very hungry, and this juicy salad tasted better to him as a donkey, he went on eating with a much greater appetite. At last he got hold of another kind of cabbage, but scarcely had he swallowed it when he felt another change, and he once more regained his human form. The hunter now lay down and slept off his weariness. When he awoke the next morning, he broke off a head of the bad and a head of the good cabbage, thinking, this will help me regain my own, and to punish faithlessness. Then he put the heads in his pocket and climbed the wall and started off to seek the castle of his love. When he had wandered about a couple of days, he found it quite easily. Then he dirtied his face quickly so that his own mother would not have known him, and went into the castle, where he begged for lodging. "I'm so tired, and I can go no further," the witch asked.
"Countryman, who are you, and what is your business?"
He answered, "I am the messenger of the king, and have been sent to seek the finest salad that grows under the sun. And I've been lucky to find it, and I'm bringing it with me. But the heat of the sun is so great that the tender cabbage threatens to grow soft, and I do not know if I shall be able to bring it any farther." When the old witch heard of the fine salad, she wanted to eat it, and said,
"Dear countryman, let me taste this wonderful salad."
"Why not?" he answered. "I brought 2 heads with me, and will give you 1. So saying, he opened his sack and gave her the bad one. The witch suspected no evil, and her mouth watered to taste this new dish, so she went into the kitchen to prepare it herself. When it was ready, she could not wait until it was served at the table, but she took a couple of leaves and put them in her mouth. No sooner, however, had she swallowed them than she lost her human form and ran into the courtyard in the shape of a donkey. Now the servant came into the kitchen, and when he saw the salad standing there ready, she was just about to carry it up. But on the way, according to her old habit, she tasted it and also ate a couple of leaves. Immediately the charm worked, and she too became a donkey, and ran out to join the old witch, and the dish with the salad in it fell to the ground. In the meantime, the messenger was sitting with the lovely maiden, and as no one came with the salad, she wanted very much to taste it. She said, "I don't know where the salad is." Then thought the hunter, "The cabbage must have already begun to work," he said. "I will go to the kitchen and fetch it myself." When he came there, he saw 2 donkeys running around the courtyard, but the salad was lying on the ground. "Well, that's all right," he said. "2 have had their share." He lifted the remaining leaves up and laid them in the dish and brought them to the maiden. "I am bringing you the delicious food my own self," he said, "so that you need wait no longer." Then she ate, and as the others had done, she at once lost her human form and ran as a donkey into the yard. When the hunter had washed his face so that he changed ones might know him, he went into the yard, saying, "Now you will receive reward for your faithlessness." He tied all 3 up with a rope and drove them away until he came to a mill. He knocked at the window, and the miller put his head out and asked what he wanted. "Well, I have 3 tiresome animals," he answered, "which I don't want to keep any longer. If you will take them and give them food and stabling, and do as I tell you with them, I will pay you as much as you want." The miller replied, "Why not? What shall I do with them?" The hunter said that he was able to keep the old donkey, which was a witch, 3 beatings and 1 meal. To the younger one, which is the servant, 1 beating and 3 meals. And to the youngest one, which was a maiden, no beating and 3 meals. For he could not find it in his heart to let the maiden be beaten. Then he went back to the castle, and he found there all he had wanted. After a couple of days, the miller came and said that he must tell him the old donkey, which was have 3 beatings and 1 meal, had died. "The 2 others," he added, "are certainly not dead, and they get their 3 meals every day, but they are so sad that they cannot last much longer." Then the hunter took pity on them, laid his anger aside, and told the miller to drive them back here again. And when they came, he gave them some of the good cabbage to eat, so that they became human again. Then the beautiful maiden fell on her knees before him, saying, "Oh, my dearest, forgive me of the ill. My mother compelled me to do it. It was against my will, for I love you dearly. Your wishing cloak is hanging in a cupboard, and as for the bird heart, I will make a drink and give it back to you." But he changed his mind and said, "Keep it. It makes no difference, for I will take you as my own dear true wife." The wedding was celebrated, and they lived happily together until death. Nice to know that the hunter does not like cabbages. Well, salad will do in a pinch. Lettuce is better than cabbage, I would suppose. I'm not a big salad person anyway, carnivore. Yeah, teeth for a reason. Anyway. My mother gave me so much spinach when I was younger, I just developed the taste to hate it. Which is weird, because I'll eat dandelions, no problem. I've picked them in my yard a few times. I've actually got some plant I'm supposed to check what it is in my yard, because it's another edible. It actually tastes kind of spicy when I tried it. It was pretty good. But still. Cabbage. Ugh. Oh, why don't you like sweet potatoes? Let us eat. Nice. I still think it's funny. He's a hunter, so of course he doesn't want to eat salads. He was looking for fruit, but no. In fact, he said all he could find was nothing but vegetables. I don't know if Master's working or not, but he should have seen that pun. Let us eat whichever green leaf we like. Yes, plants are alive. Until you eat them. Oh no, ads are gonna pop up. It says it right there. So at least I've got the ad timing thing in my chat box, so you guys can see when ads are gonna pop up. Let's see, so it's gonna be another 3-minute ad break. It doesn't show on my OBS about it, but it shows on the chat window. Oh, okay. Now it's telling me the ads start in 3 minutes. Normally, you'll get a message from Kel saying we're going to take an ad break, so. Not that message. That is for my charity donating thing that I've got that I've had up for 2 years and I've only gotten $20. So I can't even send it to them. Oh well. But now it says 1 minute 30 seconds. But again, Kel will say when the ads are coming up, so. At least she's supposed to. That's what I pay her for. Unless that's what the bot that makes her post says. Still got 1 more minute, so if you want to go get a drink or use the bathroom or anything, if you need to, feel free. I'll be sitting here. And we'll get into story number 4. Okay, now it's saying there's 46 seconds. 40 seconds. Ooh, chicken noodle soup sounds good, actually. Where's my hat? Is my hat not working? Come on, model, where's my hat? Ah. Why is my redeem not working? I like my top hat. Yeah, I'm supposed to have a top hat pop up with the Top Wolf redeem. So I'm going to switch over to presents. There you go. Do this. Maybe. Oh, come on. My chibi redeem's not going to work either. What the heck? Why do I set up these redeems if they're never going to work? Now, why does it work on the testing screen, but it doesn't work when I do the redeems? Oh, give me the hat too. That's cool. Oh, dun, 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 dun. Okay. Oh, I'm really delayed. I can't see. I'm short. Yeah, get up here. Can't see. Okay. I'm barely looking over my book. La 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 la. Ear scratches work. Ear scratches work. It's way off there. I keep forgetting how small I am when I do this. Gothic. Da, 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 da. catch the Gothita. Too cute to not catch. Ads are done. Yay! I'm small. My hat is almost bigger than my head. Yes, this is my chibi model. And another minute. Yeah, I got the Gothita. At least the ads are over. Yeah, I went ahead and had to set up different ear scritches for each size. So I guess I need to fix the placement of it a little. It's supposed to be right there on my ear, but oh, it's doing it twice. That's weird. Let's see how long it takes me to change back. Not that I couldn't read like this, but you know, it's really hard to tell I'm reading. Too small for this chair. Another 15 seconds and I should pop back to normal. I'm kind of surprised the hat hasn't gone away yet. That's weird. Or if that's just one more thing I have to fix. Oop. Ah, I'm still small. Hold on. Oh, there we go. Can't see the book if I'm that short. Okay. So our next story for this Friday Night of Fairy Tales: The Little Green Frog. In a part of the world whose name I forget, lived once a time two kings called Peridor and Diamantino. They were cousins as well as neighbors, and both were under the protection of the fairies, though it is only fair to say that the fairies did not love them half so well as they did their wives. Now, it so often happens that the princes can generally manage to get their own way. It is harder for them to be good than it is for common people. So, as it was with Peridor and Diamantino. But of the two, the fairies declared that Diamantino was much worse. Indeed, he behaved so badly to his wife, Algantine, that the fairies would not allow him to live any longer. And so he died. Leaving behind him a little daughter. And she was an only child, of course. This little girl was the heiress of the kingdom. But only being the baby, her mother, the widow of Diamantino, was proclaimed regent. The Dowager Queen was wise and good, and tried her best to make her people happy. The only thing that she had to vex her was the absence for her daughter. But the fairies, for reasons of their own, determined to bring up the little Princess Serpentine among themselves. As for the other king, he was really fond of his wife, Queen Constance, but he often grieved her by his thoughtless ways, and in order to punish him for his carelessness, the fairies decided to cause her to die quite suddenly. When she was gone, the king felt how much he had loved her, and his grief was so great, although he never neglected his duties, that the subject called him Peridor the Sorrowful. It seemed hardly possible that any man should live like Peridor for 15 years, plunged in such depth of grief, and most likely he would have died too, if it had not been for the fairies. One comfort the poor king had was his son, Prince Saphir, who was only 3 years old at the time of his mother's death, and great care was given to his education. By the time he was 15, Saphir had learned everything that a prince should know, and he was, besides that, rather charming and agreeable. It was about this time that the fairies suddenly took fright lest his love for his father should interfere with the plans they had made for the young prince. So, to prevent this, they placed him in a little room, of which Saphir was very fond, a little mirror with a black frame, such as were often bought in Venice at the time. The prince did not notice for some days that there was anything new in the room, but at last he perceived it, and he went up to look at it more closely. What was his surprise to see reflected in the mirror, not his own face, but that of a young girl as lovely as the morning. And better still, every movement of the girl, just growing out of childhood, was also reflected in the wonderful glass. As might be expected, it was impossible for the young prince had lost his heart completely to a beautiful image, and it was impossible to get him out of the room, so busy was he in watching this lovely unknown girl. Fire. Certainly, it was very delightful to see her whom he loved at any moment he chose. But his spirits sometimes sank when he wondered what was to be the end of the adventure. The magic mirror had been for about a year in the prince's possession when one day a new subject of disquiet seized upon him. As usual, he was engaged in looking at the girl when suddenly he thought he saw a second mirror reflected in the first, exactly like his own, and with the same power. And in this he was perfectly right. The young girl had only possessed it for a short time and neglected all her duties for the sake of the mirror. Now, it was not difficult for Saphir to guess the reason of the change in her, nor why the new mirror was consulted so often. But try as he would, he could never see the face of the person who was reflected in it, for the young girl's figure always came between. All he knew was that the face was that of a man, and this was quite enough to make him madly jealous. This was the doing of the fairies, and we must suppose that they had their own reasonings for acting as they did. When these things happened, Saphir was about 18 years old, and 15 years had passed since the death of his mother. King Peridor had grown more and more unhappy as time went on, and at last he fell so ill that it seemed as if his days were numbered. He was so much beloved by his subjects that this sad news was heard with despair by the entire nation, and more than any by the prince. During his whole illness, the king never spoke of anything but the queen, his sorrow for having grieved her, and his hope of one day seeing her again. All the doctors and all the water cures in the kingdom had been tried, and nothing would do him any good. At last he persuaded them to let him lie quietly in his room, when no one came to trouble him. Perhaps the worst pain he had to bear was a sort of weight on his chest, which made it very hard for him to breathe. So he commanded his servants to leave the windows open in order that he might get more air. One day, when he had been left alone for a few minutes, a bird with brilliant plumage came in and fluttered about the room, and finally rested on the sill. Its feathers were sky blue and gold, its beak and feet were glistening rubies, and no one could bear to look at them. His eyes made the brightest diamonds look dull, and on his head he wore a crown. I cannot tell you what the crown was made of, but I'm certain that it was more splendid than the rest. As to his voice, I can say nothing about that, for the bird never sang at all. In fact, he did nothing but gaze steadily at the king, and as he gazed, the king felt his strength come back to him. In a little while the bird flew into the room, still with his eyes fixed on the king, and at every glance the strength of the sick man became greater, till he was at once more well than he used to be before the queen had died. Filled with joy at his cure, he tried to seize the bird to whom he owed it all, but swifter than a swallow it managed to avoid him. In vain he described the bird to his attendants, who rushed at his first call, and in vain they sought the wonderful creature, both on horse and foot, and summoned the fowlers to their aids. The bird could be nowhere to be found. The love of his people bore King Peridor was so strong, and the reward he promised was so large, that in the twinkling of an eye every man, woman, and child had fled into the fields, and the towns were quite empty. All this bustle, however, ended in nothing but confusion, and what was worse, the king soon fell back into the same condition he was in before. Prince Saphir, who loved his father very dearly, was so unhappy at this he persuaded himself that he might succeed where others had failed, and at once prepared himself for a more distant search. In spite of the opposition he met with, he rode away, followed by his household, trusting to chance to help him. He had formed no plan, and there was no reason that he should choose one path more than the other. The only idea was to make straight for these spots where the favorite haunts of birds. But in vain he examined all the hedges and all the thickets. In vain he questioned everyone he met along the road. The more he sought, the less he found. At last he came to one of the largest forests in the world, composed entirely of cedars. But in spite of the deep shadows cast by the wide-spreading branches of the trees, the grass underneath was green and soft and covered with the rarest flowers. It seemed to Saphir that this was exactly the place where birds would choose to live, and determined not to quit the wood until he had examined it from end to end, and did any more. He ordered some nests to be prepared and painted in the same colors as the bird's plumage, thinking that we were all easily caught by what we like in ourselves. In this, he had to help not only the fowlers by profession, but also his attendants, who excelled at this art, for a man is not a courtier unless he can do everything. After searching as usual for nearly a whole day, Prince Saphir began to feel overcome with thirst. He was too tired to go any further, when happily he discovered a little way off a bubbling fountain of the clearest water. Being an experienced traveler, he drew from his pocket a little cup, without which no one should ever take a journey. And just as he was about to dip it in the water, when a lovely little green frog, much prettier than frogs generally are, jumped into the cup. Far from admiring its beauty, Saphir shook it impatiently off, but it was no good, for as quick as lightning the frog would jump back in again. Saphir, who was raging with thirst, was about to shake it off anew, when the little creature fixed upon him the most beautiful eyes in the world, and said,
"I'm a friend of the bird you are seeking, and when you have quenched your thirst, listen to me."
So the prince drank his fill, and then, by the command of the little green frog, he lay down on the grass to rest himself.
"Now," she began, "be sure you do exactly in every respect what I tell you, First you must call together your attendants and order them to remain in a little hamlet close by until you want them. Then go, quite alone, down the road that you will find on your right hand, looking southwards. This road is planted all the way with cedars of Lebanon, and going down the long way you will come at last to a magnificent castle. And now, she went on, attend carefully to what I am going to say. Take this tiny grain of sand and put it into the ground as close as you can to the gate of the castle. It has the virtue both of opening the gate and also sending to sleep all the inhabitants. Then go at once to the stable and pay no heed to anything except what I tell you. Choose the handsomest of all the horses, leap quickly on its back, and come to me as fast as you can. Farewell, Prince. I wish you good luck.
And with these words, the little frog plunged into the water and disappeared. The prince, who felt more hopeful than he did when he had left home, did precisely as he had been ordered. He left his attendants in the hamlet, found the road the frog had described to him, and followed it along. At last he arrived at the gate of the castle, which was even more splendid than he had expected, for it was built of crystal, and all its ornaments were massive gold. However, he had no thoughts to spare for its beauty, and quickly buried this grain of sand in the earth. In one instant, the gates flew open, and all the dwellers inside fell as sound asleep. Zephyr flew straight to the stable, and already had his hand on the finest horse it contained, when his eye was caught by a magnificent harness hanging up close by. It occurred to him directly that the harness belonged to the horse, and without ever thinking of harm, for indeed, who steals a horse can hardly be blamed for taking its saddle too, he hastily placed it on the animal's back. Suddenly, all the people in the castle became broad awake and rushed to the stable. They flung themselves on the prince, seized him, and dragged him away before their lord. But, luckily for the prince, who could only find a very lame excuse for his concept, the lord of the castle took a fancy to his face, and let him depart without further questions. Very sad and very much ashamed of himself, poor Zephyr crept back to the fountain where the frog was awaiting him, with a good scolding.
"Whom do you take me for?" she exclaimed angrily. "Do you really believe that it was just for the pleasure of talking that I gave you the advice that you neglected so abominably?"
But the prince was so deeply grieved and apologized so very humbly that after some time the heart of the good little green frog was softened, and she gave him another tiny little grain. But instead of it being sand, now it was a grain of gold. She directed him to do just as she had done before, with only the difference that instead of going to the stable, which had been ruin of his hopes, it was to enter the castle itself, and to glide as fast as he could down the passages until he came to a room filled with perfume, where he would find a beautiful maiden asleep on a bed. He was to wake the maiden instantly and carry her off, and to be sure not to pay any heed to whatever assistance or resistance she might make. Right, kidnap a princess. The prince obeyed the frog's orders one by one, and all went the same time as the first. The gate also opened, and the inhabitants fell found asleep. He walked down the passage till he found the girl in the bed, exactly as he had been told he would. He woke her and begged her firmly but politely to follow him quickly. After a little persuasion, the maiden consented, but only on condition that she was allowed first to put on her dress. This sounded reasonable and natural, that it did not enter the prince's head to refuse her request. But the maiden's hand had hardly touched the dress when the palace suddenly awoke from its sleep, and the prince was seized and bound. He was so vexed with his own folly and so taken aback at the disaster, he did not go to attempt to explain his conduct, and things would have gone badly with him if his friends the fairies had not softened the hearts of his captors, so that they once more allowed him to leave quietly. However, what troubled him most was the idea of having to meet the frog who had been his benefactress. How was he ever to appear before her with this tale? Still, after a long struggle with himself, he made up his mind that there was nothing else to be done, and that he deserved whatever she may say to him. And she said a great deal, for she had worked herself into a terrible passion. That the prince humbly implored her pardon and ventured to point out that it would have been very hard to refuse the young lady's reasonable requests.
"You must learn to do as you are told,"
said the frog repeatedly. But poor Saphira was so unhappy and begged so hard for forgiveness that at last the frog's anger gave way, and she held up a tiny diamond stone.
"Go back," she said, "to the castle and bury this little diamond close to the door. But be careful not to return to the stable or to the bedroom. They have proved too fatal for you. Walk straight to the garden and enter through the portico into a small green wood, in the midst of which is a tree with a trunk of gold and leaves of emerald. Perched on this tree, you will see the beautiful bird you have been seeking so long. You must cut the branch on which it is sitting, and bring it back to me without delay. But I warn you solemnly that if you disobey my directions you have done twice before, you have nothing more to expect from me or anyone else."
With these words, she jumped into the water, and the prince, who had taken her threats much to heart, took his departure, firmly resolved not to deserve them. He found it all as it had done before: the portico, the wood, the magnificent tree, and the beautiful bird, which was sleeping soundly on one of the branches. He speedily lopped off the branch, and though he noticed the splendid gold cage hanging close by, which would have been very useful to have the bird travel in, he left it alone, and came back to the fountain, holding his breath, and walking on tiptoe all the way, for fear he least should wake the bird. For what was his surprise when, instead of finding the fountain in the spot where he had left it, he saw in its place a little rustic palace built in the best taste, and standing in the doorway a charming maiden, at whose sight his mind seemed to give way. "What, madam?" he cried, not knowing what to say. "What, is it you?" The maiden blushed and answered, "Ah, my lord, it is long since I first beheld your face, and I did not think you had ever seen mine." "Oh, madam," he replied, "you can never guess the days and the hours I have spent lost in admiration of you." And after these words they each related all the strange things that had happened, and the more they talked, the more they felt convinced of the truth of the images they had seen in their mirrors. After some time and the most tender conversation, the prince could not restrain himself from asking the lovely unknown by what lucky chance she was wandering in the forest, where the fountain had gone, and if she knew anything about the frog to whom he owed all his happiness, and to whom he must give up the bird, which somehow or other was still sound asleep. "Ah, my lord," she replied, with rather an awkward air, "as to the frog, she stands before you. Let me tell you my story. It is not a long one. I know neither my country nor my parents, and the only thing I can say for certain is that I am called Serpentine. The fairies who have taken care of me ever since I was born wished me to be in ignorance as to my family, but they looked after my education and bestowed upon me endless kindness. I have always lived in seclusion, and for the last 2 years I have wished for nothing better. I had a mirror. Here, shyness and embarrassment choked her words, but gaining her self-control, she answered,
You know, the fairies insist on being obeyed without question. It is they who changed the little house you saw before you into a fountain for which you are now asking. And having turned me into a frog, they ordered me to say to the first person who came to the fountain exactly what I had repeated to you. But, my lord, when you stood before me, it was agony to my heart, filled as it was with thoughts of you, to appear under your eyes in so monstrous a form. However, there was no help for it, and as painful as it was, I had to submit. I desired your success with all my soul, not only for your own sake, but also for my own, because I could not get back to my proper shape till you had become master of the beautiful bird, though I am quite ignorant as to your reasons why.
On this, Saphir explained about the state of his father's health, and that, he had only been told before. On hearing the stories, Serpentine grew very sad, and her lovely eyes filled with tears.
Ah, my lord, she said, you know nothing of me but you have seen in the mirror, and I, who cannot even name my parents, learned that you are a king's son.
In vain, Saphir declared that love made them equal. Serpentine would only reply,
I love you too much to allow you to marry beneath your rank. I shall be very unhappy, of course, but I shall never alter my mind. If I do not find from the fairies that my birth was worthy of you, then whatever my feelings, I will never accept your hand.
Princesses. The conversation was at this point, and bid farewell to some time longer, when one of the fairies appeared in her ivory chariot, accompanied by a beautiful woman past her early youth. At this moment the bird suddenly awakened, and flying on Saphir's shoulder, which afterwards he never left, began fondling him as well as the bird can do. Okay. The fairy told Serpentine that she was quite satisfied with her conduct, and made herself very agreeable to Sapphire, who she presented to the lady she had brought with her, explaining that the lady was no other than his aunt, Eglantine, the widow of Diamantino. They fell into each other's arms till the fairy mounted her chariot and placed Eglantine by her side, and Saphir and Serpentine in the front seat. She also sent a message to the prince's attendants that they might travel slowly back to the king of Peridor, and that the beautiful bird had really been found. This matter being comfortably arranged, she started off her chariot, but in spite of the swiftness of which they flew through the air, the time seemed even quicker to Saphir and Serpentine, who had so much to think about. And they were still quite confused with the pleasure of seeing each other when the chariot arrived at King Peridor's palace. He had himself carried it to a room on the roof where his nurses thought he would die at any moment. As the chariot drew within sight of the castle, the beautiful bird took flight, and making straight for the dying king, at once cured him of his sickness. Then she resumed her natural shape, and he found that the bird was no other than the Queen Constance, whom he had long believed to be dead. Peridor was rejoiced to embrace his wife and his son once more, and with the help of the fairies began to make preparations for the marriage of Saphir and Serpentine, who turned out to be the daughter of Eglantine and Diamantino, and as much a princess as he was a prince. The people of the kingdom were delighted, and everybody lived happily and contented to the end of their lives. So, did anyone else catch the glaring issue about royals? Say that Saphir and Serpentine were cousins? Good night, Skeleton. I love that my phone decided to do the coin sound when I was reading. I try try to let people know when I'm streaming so they don't message me while I'm doing it, but some people. And thank you for coming in, Guilty. I did do the spooky whispers. Apparently, they are playing. I guess I am. It's debatable. Not hydrating well. I'm hydrating with Cherry Coke Zero. But it is, what time is it? 10:41. Dang, am I gonna have time to read another one? Let me check page count. 6 pages. Yeah, I will do one more. I wonder whether I'll just call this one the Hydra, other than the fact it's a German fairy tale. It's Die Scheibenkopfbienenschlange. Anyway, what will probably be our final story for this Friday night of Fabulous Fairy Tales. The Seven-headed Serpent. Once upon a time there was a king who determined to take a long voyage. He assembled his fleet and all the seamen and set out. They went straight on day and night until they came to an island which was covered with large trees, and under every tree lay a lion. As soon as the king had landed his men, the lions all rose up together and tried to devour them. After a long battle, they managed to overcome the wild beasts, but the greater number of men were killed. Those who remained alive now went through the forest and found on either side of it a beautiful garden, in which all the plants in the world flowered together. There were also 3 garden springs. The first flowed with silver, the second with gold, and the third with pearls. The men unbuckled their knapsacks and filled them with these precious things. In the middle of the garden they found a large lake, and when they reached the edge of it, the lake began to speak and said to them, "What men are you, and what brings you here? Are you come to visit our king?" Needless to say, they were a little too frightened to answer. Then the lake said, "You do well to be afraid, for it is at your peril that you come hither. Our king, who has 7 heads, is now asleep, but in a few minutes he will wake up and come to me to take his bath. Woe to anyone who meets him in the garden, for it is impossible to escape from him. This is what you must do if you wish to save your lives. Take off your clothes and spread them on a path which leads from here to the castle. The king will then glide over something soft, which he likes very much, and he will be so pleased with that he will not devour you. He will give you some punishment, but he will let you go." The men did as the lake advised them, and waited for a time. At noon the earth began to quake, opened in many places, and out of the openings appeared lions and tigers and other wild beasts, which surrounded the castle. And thousands of beasts came out of the castle following the king, the 7-headed serpent. The serpent glided over the clothes which were spread for him and came to the lake, and asked it who had strewn the soft things on the path. The lake answered that it had been done by people who had come to do him homage. The king commanded that the men should be brought before him, and they came humbly on their knees, and in a few words told him their story. Then he spoke to them with a mighty and terrible voice, and said, "Because you have dared to come here, I lay upon you your punishment. Every year you must bring me from your people 12 youths and 12 maidens, that I may devour them. If you do not do this, I will destroy your whole nation." Then he desired one of his beasts to show these men the way out of the garden and dismiss them. Then they left the island and went back to their own country, where they related what happened to them. And soon the time came round when the king of beasts would expect the youths and maidens to be brought to him. The king therefore issued a proclamation inviting 12 youths and 12 maidens to offer them up for their own country, and immediately many young people, more far and wide, hastened to do so. A new ship was built, all was set with black sails, and in it the youths and maidens who were appointed for the king of beasts embarked and set out to his country. When they arrived, they went at once to the lake, and this time the lions did not stir, nor did the springs flow, and neither did the lake speak. So they waited, and it was not long before the earth quaked even more terribly than the first time. The seven-headed serpent came without his train of beasts, saw his prey waiting for him, and devoured it in one mouthful. Then the ship's crew returned home. The same thing happened yearly until many years had passed. Now the king of this unhappy country was growing old, and so was the queen, and they had no children. One day the queen was sitting at the window, weeping bitterly because she was childless, and knew that the crown would therefore pass to strangers after the king's death. Suddenly, an old woman appeared before her, holding an apple in her hand, and said,
"Why do you weep, my queen? And what makes you so unhappy?"
"Alas, good mother," answered the queen, "I am happy because I have no children."
"Is that what vexes you?" said the old woman. "Listen to me. I am a nun from the spinning convent, and my mother, when she died, left me this apple. Whoever eats this apple shall have a child."
Interesting. The queen gave money to the old woman and bought the apple from her. Then she peeled it and ate it and threw the rind out the window, and it so happened that a mare that was running loose in the court ate up the apple rind. After the time the queen had a little boy, and the mayor also had a male foal. The boy and the foal grew up together and loved each other like brothers. In the course of time, the king died, and so did the queen, and their son, who was now 19 years old, was left alone. One day, when he and his horse were talking together, the horse said to him, "Listen to me, I love you, and wish you the good for the whole of your country. If you go on every year sending 12 maidens and 12 youths to the king of the beasts, your country will soon be ruined. Mount upon my back. I will take you to a woman who will direct you how to kill the seven-headed serpent." Then the youth mounted his horse, who carried him away to a mountain which was hollow, for in its side was a great underground cavern. In the cavern sat an old woman spinning. This was the cloister of the nuns, and the old woman was the abbess. They all spent their time in spinning, and that is why the convent had its name. All around the walls of the caverns there were beds cut out of the solid rock, upon which the nuns slept, and in the middle a light was burning. It was the duty of the nuns to watch the light in turns, that it might never go out, and if any one of them was to let go, the others put her to death. As soon as the king's son saw the old abbess spinning, he threw himself at her feet and entreated her to tell him how he could kill the seven-headed serpent. She made the youth rise, embraced him, and said,
"Oh, my son, that is who I sent unto your mother and caused you to be born, and with you the horse, and with whose help you will be able to free the world from the monster. I will tell you what you have to do. Load your horse with cotton, and go by a secret passage which I will show you, which is hidden from the wild beasts, to the serpent's palace. You will find the king asleep upon his bed, which is all hung around with bells, and over his bed you will see a sword hanging. With this sword only is it possible to kill the serpent, because even if the blade breaks, a new one will grow again for every head the monster has. Thus you will be able to cut off all his 7 heads. And this you must also do in order to deceive the king. You must slip into his bedchamber very softly, and stop up all the bells which are round his bed with cotton. Then take down the sword gently, and quickly give the monster a blow on his tail with it. This will wake him up, and if he catches sight of you, he will seize you. But you must quickly cut off his first head, and then wait till the next one comes up. Then strike it off also, and so on until you have cut off all 7 heads. The old abbess gave the prince her blessing, and he set upon his enterprise. Arrived at the serpent's castle by following the secret passage which she had shown him, and by carefully attending to all of her directions, he happily succeeded in killing the monster. As soon as the wild beasts heard of their king's death, they all hastened to the castle, but the youth had long since mounted his horse and was already far out of their reach. They pursued him as fast as they could, but they found it impossible to overtake him, and he reached home in safety. Thus, he freed his country from the terrible oppression. Hail Hydra. Yeah. Okay, well, I think I ended up reading 6 stories tonight too. Let's see. One, two, three, 4. No, just 5. Just do the Grateful Beast next week, which I know I've read before. And that I just named one of the chapters of my story about it. Grateful Beasts. Yeah. Anyway, thank you all for coming in. I hope you enjoyed the fairy tales, and I hope you have a very restful night tonight. Let me see who may or may not be on. Let's see. Necomom's on, I'm pretty sure. Oh, Oni rated Necomom. Okay. You know what? I think I'm going to rate Oni. Oni is doing the marathon right now, so let me get the message put up. Oop, get on the right window so I can put the message up. Catch aluminium. I think it's a fish.
Luminion. Yeah, that's one of the fish. Anyway. Yeah, thank everyone for coming in tonight. I always appreciate having people around. I hope you enjoyed the stories because I like reading them. That's kind of a given. But I'm going to try to get a few more things set up. There's other stuff I've got working in the background besides trying to write the stories. I've got 2 more fairy tales to get written in the book, so hopefully I'll have the book out soon. And then, of course, I'll add it to other things. Anyway, again, thank you for coming in. And I will see you around next time. Go ahead and get this raid set up. Raid. Oh, crap. Okay. Rafe. Ah, man, you're gonna... hate typos. Okay. Oh. I did it again? Had someone pause. Raid. Worked this time. Yay, it worked. Okay. So yeah, we're gonna raid EB. Hope everyone has a great night. And hope we see you next time. Have a good night, everyone.